Zayed, welcome to
Hey,
Grand Theft World. How are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm doing wonderfully well. I'm glad to talk to you. I don't like talking to you under these circumstances. I do enjoy the fact that in the past 30 days or so, the cause that you've been out there promoting, the liberation of an American citizen being held in Israel, a teenager from Florida, has become more and more well known. And when I first talked about this story about 2 months ago, I showed my wife because there's a lot of things in this line of work that sometimes makes you feel helpless. But when you see a large group of people on the other side of the world being persecuted, that makes you feel helpless. But when it's an American citizen, and then there's a couple American citizens involved in this story, it makes you feel helpless in a way that you're indignant, that I can't believe this is going on in my country, and somebody should be doing something about it. Somebody should be covering it. Somebody should be moving some political pieces around the chessboard. Somebody should be opening negotiations or back channel conversations, any of these things to move it forward. And I didn't see any of those things being done. So my wife, being my wife, eventually reached out to you and started reaching out to some other people who knew some other people who might be influential in the situation. And now we're at a point where you have a lot of press coverage. I have a number of tabs open from The Guardian to CNN to various other outlets, a lot of independent outlets the past week, the Young Turks, Katie Halper, Breaking Points, mentioned you guys in passing. But it's a bigger story about two American, a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old from Florida. So, from the audience's perspective, coming into this not knowing anything, because this is a fortunate situation where they don't cover it, but also people haven't been propagandized on it yet. So, the benefit of them not covering it for the past 9 months is that you have a clean slate to introduce the plight. It's so far a tragedy, but hopefully we can make it into something that re-inspires hope and reopens communication and gets us away from this dehumanizing mentality where people can treat other people like this. So, if you would be so kind, could you start with the story of an ice cream shop and some entrepreneurs in Florida?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for giving us the time and the platform to talk about this and and bring this to some type of awareness. And thank Lisa for reaching out and following up with me. She's been excellent. As the uncle of this story, I say thank you. But on behalf of my family who's going through this, they really appreciate it, and words are not enough. But this started about a year and a half ago. Three young kids who their moms are all sisters. So you got three sisters, Americans, born and raised. Each one of their kids graduated high school around the same time, and they're looking for jobs. And the three fathers of the three kids, got together and said, they're like a package deal. They grew up together. They went to school together. Their moms were all sisters. Instead of each one kind of veering off and doing their own thing, since they kind of get along so well and grew up together, maybe we kind of pitch in and find something constructive and something that they can benefit from, like a business or something like that. They called me up. I'm in Brevard County. I'm on the east coast of Florida, and they said, what do you think is good for the kids? I said, what do you guys got in mind? He said, I don't know, something that, that doesn't take much training, something that's good for young men. And a friend of ours said, hey, by the way, my next door neighbor has an ice cream shop, and they're neighboring businesses. And he said it used to be a really good shop, but they're having employee issues after COVID and all this stuff. And it used to be really busy, and it just kind of fell off. And they talked to the owner, and he said it was management, staffing. The guy had a couple of other locations that were a couple hours away, so he couldn't focus on this one. And I contacted the guy, and I said, I heard you trying to sell your business, and kind of negotiated back and forth. And he came at us with like a high number, and I said, based on the traffic, it doesn't make any sense. and it looks like, you guys aren't doing too well, and I hope you make it. But if you don't, we could probably step in and take the business after it closes. But if you want to be reasonable, and sell it now, you could keep your equipment in there, and, we'll be fair, but, you need to be fair too, So I negotiated a deal, for the three nephews, the three first cousins. And we picked up the store, new management. We remodeled it. And the kids went around Tampa and the surrounding areas. And, social media, how kids are. And they said, this place is good. This place is good. This place has good reviews. This place has bad reviews. And they kind of went like on a taste test tour and saw, what things were working and what wasn't. And they came up with this ice cream. It's an Amish organic type of ice cream, locally from a dairy farm in Florida. And they said, yeah, you guys are in an area where we can give you guys, our product, and we protect our accounts, make sure that there's not too many people selling the same ice cream. Also, our Amish ice cream, we don't produce enough to have everywhere. So they picked up, like the number one brand of ice cream, and they set the store up, and it was really slow. They started advertising, and each one, on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and on Google and everything. And, the three guys slowly started building it up to what, the potential it had before, it went bad. And they kind of rebranded the store. And being Palestinian and Middle Eastern, um, the new trend came out of this viral Dubai chocolate type stuff. So they kind of networked that into the store, and influencers on Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat and TikTok started coming to the store, and slowly, um, it, the business took off. It skyrocketed, which was good. But also, you have these kids who are 18 and 19 years old, working 50 hours a week, 55 hours a week. They're still guys. They wanted to go to the Bucks games. They wanted to go to the Rays games. They wanted to, Busch Gardens is down the street. They wanted to go on, do kid stuff too. So eventually, this July in 2025, the kids were getting burned out. They hired some more staff. And the middle one, Saifullah Musalet, we call him Saif or Saifo. He said, man, he said, Uncle, I need a vacation. I said, you don't need one. You also deserve one. You've been really grinding, and you're the manager, you're the opener, the closer, the server, the cashier. He's doing everything. And he said, I want to go see my mom and dad. And I said, yeah, and you know what you're doing. Line up your ducks in a row, and take a vacation. So he calls up his pops, and he says, Dad, I want to come home. I'll come visit mom. And he's got a little sister and a little brother there also. He His dad says, sure. He says, but Dad, it's really busy. I feel bad. I feel guilty leaving the store, for that long. His dad said, you know what? Come over. I want to spend a couple weeks with you. And then I'll hop over to Tampa and cover the rest of your 2 or 3 week trip while you stay with your mom and sister and brother. He said, done deal. He took off. He goes and visits in June. Fortunately, in July, there was some type of conflict with Iran and Israel, and a back and forth tit for tat thing. And airports were getting closed. His flight got canceled. And I think he had to find a new flight from Jordan back to Tampa. So, it's like another process in itself. You have to go down to the Dead Sea area to Jericho. You have to cross through the Palestinian border. Then you go into the Israeli side, and then you go from the Israeli side to the Jordanian side. And then from the Jordanian border, you go to the airport. So he found a new reservation, and it was a Friday afternoon. Um, there was a group message going around that, hey guys, there's settlers, Israeli settlers are in this area, and they're breaking into these small ranch houses on these farms, and there's lighting fires, chopping down trees. Turns out that Safe's father had a deed. He had some land there, and Safe, hopped in his car and went to his father's land to make sure it was okay. And there was the IDF was there, and and they basically say, "What are you doing here?" He says, "It's my dad's land. I'm his son. I'm American." And he gets through, and then there was some type of ambush. Israeli settlers came out of the hills, and they attacked Safe, and he couldn't get away. And in the middle of all the chaos, a friend of his, um, I think a year older than him, but they were born on the same date. He was shot in the back, and I think the bullet exited through his abdomen. And Saifullah was attacked by sticks and rocks, and he was beaten to death. Uh, some people said it was about 10 or 11 on one, and he didn't have a chance. Ambulances were called, but the IDF blocked the ambulance from entering the area for over 2.5 hours. Safe's little brother made it to him through, settlers on one side and the IDF on the other. He literally scaled the whole mountain hillside, came down in the valley, and came back up into the next area and got to his brother, who was still breathing. But he couldn't pick him up and take him somewhere safe because you got two groups of people trying to hurt you. But he also couldn't leave his older brother there. Eventually, they let the ambulance through 2.5 hours later. When the ambulance gets through, the settlers attack the ambulance and destroy it. The windshield, the back window. I think the driver had a minor injury too. Saifullah took his last breath 5 minutes before they were able to get him into the ambulance. So I'm at work that Friday here in Florida, and I get a phone call from my wife, and she can't talk. At the same time, my wife was 8 months pregnant. It's her first pregnancy in 20 years. We've been married for 20 years trying to have a baby. And God blessed us with our first pregnancy after 20 years. Like 15 IVF cycles. And, on a personal note, um, it was an honor. We were really happy that we finally, God blessed us with this pregnancy. And I thought she couldn't talk because, the water break is and I'm begging her to say, please tell me something because I'm shaking. I'm thinking that there's something wrong with the pregnancy. After 20 years, we made it 8 months. God forbid what could have happened. And I broke down. I fell to the floor and dropped my phone. And I'm in the middle of my business. And I was just asking God, please, don't let it be this. And she finally said no. I said, no, I'm okay. She said, you didn't hear about your nephew Safe. And I picked up the phone. I said, you have to tell me something. What's wrong with Safe? What's wrong with Safe? She said, he was just beaten to death and martyred in the West Bank. I don't know how, I don't know what happened next, but before I realized it, I was 110 miles west heading to Tampa. I live on the east coast of Florida, Safe, and the ice cream shop is in Tampa on the west coast. I drove to Orlando to Tampa. I guess just automatically, you know, you go and be where you need to be when things like this happen. So I drove to his father's, the father who jumped on a plane to work for his son while his son, you know, and I called the other two kids, my other two nephews that work with Safe in the store. One's crying in the background, and the other one is locked in his bedroom, not answering his phone or responding to his, you know, his brother. And I said, "Where's Kamal, Safe's father?" He said, Ammo, which is uncle. He said he's in the room and his door is locked and he's not answering. I want to go in there and give him a hug. I said, "Uncle, I'm 15, 20 minutes away. Wipe your tears. You know, I need one of you guys to be strong until I get there. And me and you will mourn each other later. We'll get our feelings out. But we got to see what happened. Number one. Number two, I need to get my cousin, the father, on a plane to go be with his family." I get to Tampa, and when I say devastated, you know, all the friends, the community, the word got out in those 2 hours. Customers, customers from the ice cream shop, family, neighbors, everybody's in front of the house, just kind of staring at each other like what do we do? And the father walks out. Um, he was with his two brothers, his two older brothers, and he comes to me and he puts his hand on the back of my head and puts his head on my shoulder. And you know, we did what family does. We got our emotions out, we got our tears out, we wiped our faces, and we jumped in the car and drove to Orlando and put him on the first flight. And he checked in. Safe's best friend, Dahlman, came from Tampa to Orlando, was able to get on the same flight for moral support. Um, Hikmet, our other cousin, grabbed his passport and ran to the airport. And I grabbed Kamal and I said, "Look, cool heads, prevail. You have a 17, 18-hour flight. Let it all out. When you get off the airplane and you go to the hospital to see your son, you know, fake it until you make it. You know, be strong. Have moral support for your wife who just, saw what happened to her son and you weren't there. And then, his younger brother and the little sister, and they have a baby. They have a baby boy. I think he's 5 or 6 years old now." And I said, stand up and do your thing. And then, you know, when you get alone, you can take care of yourself. But right now, they're the priority. I came home, I saw my wife, made sure that she was okay. And I'm just sitting by the phone for 20 hours. I couldn't sleep. There's a 7-hour time difference from here and overseas. And finally, like 24 hours later, I get a text message from him. And he said, "I wish you could have been with me, but I know, with the pregnancy and your wife and all these years, uh, you couldn't make it. But when I kissed my son, a lot of the stress on my shoulders was relieved. That when he finally got there and was be able to, next to his son." And when I texted him back, I said, "I have some comfort knowing how close we were and how we worked together and how we achieved something, but mainly that I was the uncle that he liked to call and joke with and laugh with, and like just so much respect from him." I said it's an honor to know that I treated him so well and that he knows I loved him. And he wrote me back, "You have no idea how much he loved you." So this is in July. And that's the story of Saifullah Musalet, my nephew from Tampa, a 20-year-old. And he was taken from us by illegal settlers on his own land, unarmed, alone. And the other child I was telling you, his name is Mohammed Shalabi. That's the one that was shot in the back at the same instance. They found him on the hillside hours later and at night. His father knew that two kids were killed there. And these two kids were born on the same day, not on the same year, but on the same day. And they were friends. He said, I won't bury my son until the other father comes here. I'm not going to burden this town and this village and the surrounding areas to come to two funerals and, two separate forms of pain. I'm a father and I know what the other guy's going through who's not here. I'll wait for him to come. He waited for Kamal at the hospital where the kids were after Kamal landed in Tel Aviv and drove to the hospital. He was there to, greet him and give his condolences. And they buried the two kids next to each other in the same plot. And I'm so proud of people who are that strong. At the same time, it's a shame what these people see every day to know how to respond to these situations, that it's almost the norm. What did these people go through in their lifetime to be so unselfish? How many funerals, how many kids are killed like this, where there's almost a protocol, right? And, you know, emotions on the side. It was really, you know, caring of the other father to wait for the other father coming who were in his same shoes. And they said, we'll bear our children together and we'll get through this together. That's in July. In February, my other nephew, Mohammed Ibrahim, he's the little brother of the three brothers that work at the ice cream shop. He came to visit and he flew to California, and his two sisters live in California. His brother was in Tampa at the ice cream shop. Um, he came for a couple months and saw his sisters and his brother and his family. He came right here to this home. He spent a couple of evenings here with me, with Uncle Z. He flew home end of January of 2025, and school started in February after the winter break. And he said, Uncle, I'm going to be back in June or end of May. I'll be 16. I know you helped the guys get their driver's licenses, all three of them. I helped them, study and take the test and everything. He says, I want to get my permit. He says, I already know how to drive, Uncle. But, the written exam, I'm going to need your help. I said, yeah, we'll help you. We'll make it make sense where, And he said, okay. And then I'm going to work. He said, I'm going to work with the guys. I see you made shirts with the store logo on there. I said, yeah. But you're a little man, I don't know if I got your size. So I made a extra small for him and I put the logo on there on the front and back. And he sent me a picture of him wearing his shirt that it fit. And I'll be ready for the summer. So he travels back home, and on February 16th at 3:30 or 4 a.m., there's pounding on their door. His father opens up the door, and the IDF, says, "Get out the way. We have to come into your house." He says, "What do you mean?" He says, "Move." They're soldiers. Everybody's M16s, flashlights, and ski masks. He says, "The house is full." I said, "How many?" He says, "A lot." He says, "I don't know, maybe 25, 30 between what was inside and outside." And they said, "Who's here?" He said, "Me and my family." He said, "Who's your family?" He said, "My wife, my daughter, and my son." And he says, "Where's your son at?" He said, "He's asleep." Kid's 15 years old. It's 4 a.m. He says, we need to see him. Where's his room? He says, right over there. The father opens the door. They walk into the bedroom. The kid's asleep. He wakes up and sees, you know, masked military men, armed, heavily armed. And he looks at his dad. And he tells his son to wake up. They want to talk to you. There was no talking. They grab a rag. They tie it around his eyes. They put his arms behind his back. They grab some zip ties. Click, click, click. They grab him on each side of the arm, and they take him and throw him in the back of a Jeep. The military, like the armored Jeeps. What is it? What's today's date? October 20th. I'm sorry, today's November 1st. So November 16th would be 9 months. That was the last time the mom and dad saw him. The moment that he was zip tied. They take the kid to an interrogation center and say there was a group of kids throwing rocks. And we believe you were, with them throwing rocks. He said, I didn't throw any rocks. I said, well, we think you did. He said, well, I didn't. And they said, these three kids said you did. He said, well, I didn't. That's not true. They take him and they transfer him to a prison named Megiddo, spelled with double G. And Megiddo is like this notorious prison that human rights organizations across the world have been reporting on about, torture and suffering and now we're kind of freaked out. So, that morning, the first phone call that was made to the US Embassy that a 15-year-old American that's been in the country for a few weeks was kidnapped. I personally, politics on the side, if your son is taken at gunpoint, blindfolded, and zip tied, and they don't tell you where he is, where he's going, or why, I, I don't. That's not detention or arrest. That's kidnapping. If there was some type of due process, I would understand. You know, you can call him a prisoner, but a 15-year-old, an American, in a different country's military prison, not a civilian prison, which also has a military judge, a military prosecutor, and a military interrogator who's interrogating you with an M16 on his chest and a ski mask. And that's the first thing you see as a child when your blindfolds come off, except for the glare of the lights. The kids rub their eyes and they're like, oh, where am I? So the scare tactics and the fear tactics, I would hope any kid would just say, yeah, I did it, instead of going through what they think they're about to go through. So the kid says, I didn't throw any rocks. I didn't hit anything. I didn't do anything. And they sent him to Megiddo. And Megiddo is a tough place to be for anybody. Adults, children, anything. We get a hold of the US Embassy. We call lawyers. We ask who's the best in town who can help us. And there's kind of that smirk. It says, do you guys not understand the last couple of years? We could inquire. We can see what's going on. Turns out that night they picked up 3 other kids. And the alleged charge was somebody threw a rock. And we believe it's one of these kids. We don't know who it was. But it's a package deal. So whoever's there is guilty. And we said, yeah, but he's American and he didn't do anything. And they said, nah, that That nationality doesn't mean anything. You're not in a civilian, or you're not in a civilian court or at the U.S. embassy where you're protected. This is military. And we said, military? He's 15 years old. There's Geneva codes. There's, President Trump right now. What do you mean? He's a Floridian. We got our Secretary of State here from Florida. We got Governor DeSantis, from Florida. They just flew back 1,500 Israeli Americans on chartered flights, and the rest of them were put on ferries and sent to Greece and Athens, and then flown back. This ain't gonna happen to us. He's a kid. He's an American, and he's innocent. And they said, you're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. You're in Megiddo prison, and it's a different story here. The advice was true. In his first visit, I think he was down 7 kilos, which is close to 14 pounds. The second visit, he had way more weight loss. We didn't get the exact number, but if it was more than 15 pounds or 14 pounds, it was estimated around 25 or 30 in 4 months. The kids are losing 8 pounds a day, a month. The third visit, he said scabies on his leg, and they requested some type of ointment, and antibacterial, or some type of antibiotic ointment. He said, "How does he get scabies?" They said, "It's filthy in there. Laundry, showers, soap, shampoo. Everybody in the whole prison has scabies." Well, once again, he's an American. He's a kid. The next time, which was the worst, update we got, was his body was covered with scabies. Skin was very pale. That he had these big like circles around his eyes, and the weight loss was not reported by how many pounds or kilos he lost. The word that was used was low BMI. And I don't know if that was somebody with a heart who said, these people are already going through enough, I don't want to tell them. Or if that was something like that sounds better on a report. As an uncle, it doesn't matter. It's serious. The kid is deteriorating. His health is in question. But his mental health, is also a factor here. And more importantly, 8 months, 9 months almost now goes by. His mother's not allowed to see him or speak to him or write him a letter. His father can't see him or visit him. The U.S. Embassy on their visits can't take a picture and send it to the parents. So I'm asking myself, why? Is that the system there? Is that the rules? Or does he look so bad that this is a shame on both governments, the U.S. and Israelis, for not doing something about it? Are they worried about bad press? Like, look at what's happening to these kids, and all these human rights organizations who've been complaining about this prison and writing up about the torture and the abuse and the beatings and the starvation. Is it going to prove a point? Does it come PR, public relations now on our behalf? That you're using our son or our nephew as a pawn. So come July, Saifullah gets killed, and Ambassador Huckabee comes to our village overseas to pay his condolences. Say's father sits with him, with another American father named Hafid Abdul Jabbar from New Orleans, who buried his son a year and a half ago at the time, who was shot in the back of the head by an Israeli sniper while sitting in the front seat of his car. The bullet went through the headrest of the car and went through his skull. 17 years old. So Muhammad's father, Zahir, the kid, the 15-year-old, is sitting with his brother-in-law during this funeral. And this other father of an American kid comes. So you got three US fathers. Two of their children are dead, and one is in prison. Hafiz says, hey guys, my son was killed and murdered by a sniper, an American, a 17-year-old. No one's been arrested, got no answers, complete impunity for the people who did it. And my elected officials in New Orleans won't even meet with me. It was a shock, but a wake up call for Kamal, Saif Allah's father. And he says, what, you mean they're just going to get away with this? He says, I can only tell you what I've been through. Mike Huckabee comes, and we were, happy that the US is recognizing this and he's coming to our village. And they sat with him. And, we always point our fingers at, people who don't do their job, especially elected officials, right? But, we'll give him a thumbs up for coming and paying his respects and, doing what he should, whether it was intentional from his heart or whether it was, his job. He showed up. So, and he says, I'm sorry about your loss. I'm here to pay my condolences and my respects. And he sat with them. It wasn't no pop in and pop out. He genuinely took his time. And the two fathers said, well, thank you. We appreciate it. We want accountability. And also our kids are gone. You can't bring them back. We're grieving. But the nephew, this guy's kid, another American, is still there. The biggest tragedy would be if he joins this club. And he says, I'll work on it. I'll see what I can do. I'll help you. And, and so on. That was in mid-July. We're in November now. Muhammad is still in prison. We weren't blind to the fact that Israel and the US Embassy are either not going to do anything or not help too much. But after seeing what happened with Saifullah and how close me and the kids are, we got phone calls from organizations here in the States saying, what's going on? We're here to help. I said, well, we need it. You guys are here to help, and we don't have any pride to say that we're good. We need some help. First of all, justice and accountability for these kids who've been murdered. Second of all, it's time sensitive. Muhammad's health is deteriorating in this prison. What can we do? And that's where it all started. That's where all this started. It started, it got heavy in August. We've been advocating and going on delegations to DC. We met with senators, we met with congressmen, we met with activists, we met with some good people, Veterans for Peace. We met with Jewish Voices for Peace, Code Pink, and hats off to these people. Because as a Palestinian American, I would see, social media and people who would try to bring these things out and say, look at these tragedies happening. And the most you would do is maybe hit like or share or comment, but you really don't know what they're doing on the ground and how hard they're working until it hits you at home and you see that these people are here to help. So a human rights group called CCR contacted me, and IMEU. And they introduced themselves and they said, we have a delegation in DC. If you guys would like to come, we can help you guys reach the right people who could possibly help you. And I think we had 17 meetings in 3 days with senators and congressmen and congresswomen. directly, not with the staff, not with, yeah, but the actual, elected officials. And it was a lesson for me because on this delegation, Hafid, the child's father from New Orleans who was shot in the back of the head, jumped on a plane and made it to DC. But so did Saif Allah's father, Kamal. So I was there to, on behalf of my nephew, but also with two guys that I know growing up, family and friends who've been through this. But there were there was a young lady named Ozden from Washington. Ozden is the sister of an American Turkish girl named Aisha Noor, who was killed in September 2024. And she was in DC for the 1 year anniversary of her sister's death. And her sister's husband, Hammond from Washington State, also flew in. So, we were four Americans, one in prison, and the other three who lost their loved ones, all innocent, all unarmed, and all their killers are still walking free. And here I am as an uncle trying to explain to senators and congressmen that this kid has been gone at the time for 7.5 months for standing next to somebody that they think threw a rock. Make it make sense. And then I met these two uh, elderly, this couple named Cindy and Craig Corey, which are Rachel Corey's parents. So I think almost 23 years of advocating for their daughter, a white American girl who was trying to help a family's house not get demolished. And before demolishing the house, the IDF soldiers inside a Caterpillar bulldozer ran her over and crushed her and left her in the dirt. And that was the smack in the face that I needed to say, can I cuss on this?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay. So that was the wake up call that this shit happens and they don't give a fuck. That this poor lady and this poor man, the nicest people that you can ever meet, so eloquent, so polite, been walking these hallways for almost 23 years. There wasn't a door number or a building or a hallway or a basement that cuts across to the other buildings. There wasn't even a shortcut that they didn't know. I mean, they've been busting their asses trying to get some kind of answers to feel like that, that they did something, that their daughter didn't die in vain, and that they just brushed it off like it was nothing. So I'm literally sitting with these trailblazers for 4 days. And when I say what an honor to learn from them on who would help and who wouldn't, and what can make you feel better. At the same time, you're crossing your fingers, saying, "Oh God, please don't let me join the club. We can still save Muhammad." These four American families, they can't do anything for him. They can't bring these kids back. Not even recognize that there should be some type of accountability. And CCR and IMEU, you know, uh, Brad Parker, Maria, Amira, Janine. I mean, just people that we didn't know were walking us to these holes, supporting us, organizing everything like they're part of the family. And I realized, that these stories are just a drop of in a whole ocean of what this occupation in Palestine is. And as an uncle, not even one of the fathers, that when your hands are tied, this is all you can do is go to media, go to your elected officials, hope that somebody would say, you know what, You're my constituent. I'm going to do my job and get you answers. Not in Florida, buddy. Not in Florida. Um, Rick Scott, no response. No response to the kid that was killed. No response for the kid who's the child who's still in prison. Governor DeSantis, nothing. Our local rep from Brevard County, Mike Herodopoulos, nothing. Email responses that are saying, yeah, we got your message. We'll see what we can do. He won't talk to the family. He won't pick up the phone call. He won't take any meetings for them. Kathy Castor from Tampa, she's trying to help. I think she signed a letter, congressional letter to the White House, requesting that they intervene directly to Secretary of State Rubio and Mike Huckabee. But he wasn't Israeli American enough to be part of the 1,500 people that was flown back. And on the last peace deal, the first phase, when there was a prisoner exchange and a hostage exchange, he wasn't part of the deal. And we thought he was going to be because he was an American child. He was there for 8 months at the time. And they told us, well, he's the prisoner exchange that happened was people from the Gaza Strip. So we said, hold on, for 8 months, he's not American enough to get help. But today, the opportunity for him to come home, now he's not Palestinian enough or Gazan enough. So we're back at step one, like, this double standard. And what do we do? So we're still pushing. We went back on a second delegation last week to DC, and it was during the shutdown, and we were seeing we seen a couple of senators. God bless them. Senator Van Hollen has been a huge help. Senator Maria Cantwell met with me directly and followed up and called. She's been trying to help through her channels. I met Senator Warnock in the hallway, the one from Georgia, and I had saw him in the first visit there directly. I just bumped into him, and he remembered me, and I shook his hand, and he said, I signed that letter. I'm here to help. Senator Welch sent me a photograph that me and him took in September, and wrote me a message and said, "Keep pushing, and I'll help as much as I can." So I think it was 28 or 29 people signed the letter, and I don't know if they got that many signatures for Stop the Bomb Act. So it's there's some people trying. It's a small percentage. We met with congressmen and congresswomen, but their low-level staff are there because it's the shutdown. And then I realized, the Democrats and the Republicans can't agree on having the government open back up and do what's best for the American people. I heard about the food stamp thing and the health care, and and we're not talking about anything internationally. We're talking about right here at home. But the funds to send bombs and the funds to kill people, they do agree on. So I don't have a lot of high hopes that these people are going to become human. I also don't believe when they first got into politics as mothers and fathers that this is what they signed up for. I think, not politically, but I think as a civilian or as a citizen of Florida or the United States, and as a father myself now, right, that these lobbyists and the international pressure from these people, I think that our administration and our government are just as occupied as the West Bank and Gaza. And though not military wise, they are occupied. And I think for the first time in a long time, I'm 48 years old. I was born in 77. I think for the first time in a long time, people are waking up. The America First movement, which is, finally, I think APEC, for every dollar, you guys can do your research. I mean, I'm sure Lisa's good at this, but I think for every dollar they invest in US politics, as far as funding campaigns, if you do the math, I think the breakdown is $5,869 goes back to Israel, whether financially, technology, military. You could have bought Bitcoin when the first day it dropped and not make that kind of return on your investment. You could have bought Google and back before people knew what it was, or even Amazon, and not get that type of investment back. So yeah, officials become more concerned with reelection over doing what you know they should be doing. And from a Floridian standpoint, I'm really disappointed because the Secretary of State, I think, is a Cuban American, and he knows from his family roots when people had to leave Cuba and found a home in Miami and grows up there, and that you made it to the White House. You know what occupation is, and you know what it is to be, a an American or Cuban American, or whatever else you are. So, is it Muhammad's not American enough? Is it because his name is Muhammad? Is if his name was Moshe Abraham or Moshe Goldstein, would he still be there? And I have proof that he wouldn't. There is an Israeli American who joined the IDF and got captured in Gaza. And the White House and the administration negotiated a deal directly with, who they called a terrorist organization. And they got him out without working with the Israelis. And he's back here in America. And I think his first statement was, send me back, I'll go fight again for my other country. He's an adult who made that decision. What about a child? You know? So that's the story, Richard. It's sad that I have to sit here 9 months later and he's still there and tell you about it. There was no, we're still in shock that we're still doing this for 9 months. But, ultimately, we're doing what we can. We're asking, our elected officials to do what they can. And we're going to remind everybody about the ones who helped and the ones who didn't. And the American public deserves to know who's brainwashed in DC and who still has a soul and who's still human. Because we never talked about borders. We never talked about politics. We never talked about, anything about this whole situation except for he's a civilian, he's an American child. There should be some due process for a kid that faces a judge, a prosecutor, an interrogator, in a military prison. And you can look this up. I think it was 99.8% conviction rate. What is his chances? And after seeing what happened to our other nephew and the other Americans I mentioned to you earlier, you know, do they even give a shit that he's American or not? And after what, 76 years of the state of Israel, has there ever been an administration that has a relationship with the one that they have right now? They're close friends. And you remind me every single day that they're the only democracy in the Middle East. They're our closest ally in the Middle East. That there's only one, Jewish homeland. Don't bring religion into it. It's not about the Jewish homeland. A lot of Jewish people, good Jewish people, have been helping us in DC. A lot of good Jewish people have been supporting us. We're not talking about Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, or Jew. We're talking about a kid, and any kid deserves to be with his parents, not in a prison locked up, deteriorating. So talk to this democracy that you tell us is the only democracy in the Middle East. Tell them about what due process is. Tell them about juvenile detention centers here in the States when a 15-year-old gets in trouble, how they go about things, and treat him as a child and a human first. And then if you want to bring up his nationality, that he's American second, but it shouldn't matter what color your passport is. It shouldn't matter what religion or what faith you have, you know? And I don't know if you have any questions for me, man, about what else we've been doing. I'll be glad to talk to you and answer.
Let's talk about 9 months from now when Mohammed Ibrahim is back home with his family. He's well fed, he's recovering from the situation. What is a plan in your mind that could lead to that outcome, given your knowledge of the geopolitical terrain now that you've been in it 9 months? You know what's realistic, you know what's not realistic. One side might have to save face in order to come to the table in this situation. That might be the thing keeping him over there is they're really embarrassed about the conditions in which they kept an American child in a military prison. And they figured out now that people are finding out about that, that could be bad. So what can you say as the uncle, as a negotiator in this situation, an olive branch to maybe take away some of their fear from sitting at the table?
I think when the word got out and social media and news outlets and independent journalism got out in July, I'm not a doctor and I don't know anything that's happening in there, but I think the damage that was done to him physically from February to mid July, about 5 months, I, I, I don't think you could bring that weight back up and overnight. I don't think the scabies and the, clears up in a week or two. I think that he's at a point now that they should be embarrassed enough and ashamed enough to say, let's fatten him up. Let's get his skin cleared. Let's treat him a little better. And let's get rid of this headache. There's an organization called CAIR, CAIR. And, from day one, they also been trying to help. And one of their head representatives met me in DC just as moral support. One of the representatives flew from Florida and met me in DC. And I really like what he said. His name is Ahmed. He said he was telling senators and congressmen. He said, this shouldn't be so hard. This is a simple layup for you to say, we did this and brought this kid home. The alleged charges are ridiculous. Every child there, out of I don't know how many, 400 or 600 kids, are either accused of rock throwing or a social media post. Listen to that. And they can do 6 months of administrative imprisonment without ever seeing a judge. That just based on sheer allegation, I can keep you here for 6 months. And the day that you're about to walk out after 6 months, without seeing a judge again, they can tack on another 6 months of administrative imprisonment. And I think they can do that 4 times. So you could sit there for 2 years with no visits, no connection to your outside world, even as a child, without even seeing a judge, based on administrative imprisonment. Muhammad's situation is that his first 3 court cases were delayed. So we never were able to get, let alone talk to the kid and ask him how he's doing, you know. I think this past Wednesday, he did see a judge. And whatever happened, it was in Hebrew. We don't, you know, his dad was able to see him through a television screen. So the father's standing in front of the judge, a lawyer, a prosecutor, and some type of bailiff, military bailiff, and his son's in a different room somewhere, on a TV screen. The kid sees his dad the first time in 8.5 months. What do you think a kid would do?
Smile.
Wanted to see, like, here I am, pops.
Yeah. Yeah.
They fucking smack his arm down. A armed, military guard, a frail, pale, sick 15-year-old American cannot say hi through a TV screen to his dad in front of a judge. I'm sorry,
No,
in
dude,
front
I mean,
in front of
because
a judge, in front
yeah,
of
I
a
mean,
prosecutor, on a video camera. What the fuck are they doing to the kid when the cameras are off? Ask yourself. If that's what they would do in front of a military judge and a military prosecutor, just smacking the arm, a simple assault on a minor, right? Child abuse, right? At the minimum. What do they do when the cameras are off? What do they do to them in interrogation? I don't know. I'm not saying that they did. I'm asking you if that's what they did on camera. And then, secondly, the lawyer says to him, "How are you feeling?" He says, "I have a stomach ache and my head hurts." The guy walks up to him and confronts him and says something and walks away. And Muhammad's demeanor changed. And she said, "No, no, no, hold on. What did he just say to you?" He told me to shut up and don't be a liar. So we have, on one end, the father saying, "Okay, thank God, here's my son. He's breathing." And it's been 8 months and he's whiter than the wall, no sunlight. But at the same time, look what they're doing in front of me. And we asked on Tuesday, we asked the US Embassy to send a staff member to witness what's going on during the courts because, we're not friends and family. There's no trust. We need somebody, a third party. And we also asked for them to send a, uh, a Hebrew speaking staff member, which they did, but they were not allowed to enter. And God bless the guy who came from the staff, from the embassy. He stayed there and waited the whole day and said, "I'm sorry. Like, what else could I do? This is a military courtroom." But I wanted to show up, and and I came, and I'll be here again if you need me, you know? So, as upset as we were, we're glad that this guy did show up at least and try to do his part. So now we're waiting till November 9th. And we're going to keep pushing, you know, and people like you can get the story out. And maybe the right person hears this and says, "Baby, I know somebody. Maybe I can reach out to somebody who can do something." And, and that's all we have besides God's grace is just hoping that somebody will be human about this and get this kid home.
Let me ask you, dad to dad, is that bravery when a man handles a child like that, or is that cowardice?
Man to man?
Like me to you, talking back and
Yeah.
forth. I
You
mean,
know,
that kid's on
you,
video. He's in a court proceeding. You're gonna
you know
treat him
Richard,
like that. Like it's like like
Richard, I
Abu
think you
Ghraib
probably,
happened because they wrote a memo on Alberto Gonzales wrote a memo saying that waterboarding, which in World War II prosecutions was a death penalty for Japanese soldiers who waterboarded Americans, all of a sudden that's enhanced interrogation, and we could do it at black sites and Abu Ghraib and these various places. So
yeah.
America is not clean-handed in this whole thing. It rides right alongside Israeli type of policies like that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, man to man, my stance. That's not even a human, you know, doing that. But at the same time, my kids are here at my home, with clothes and food, and their mom's taking care of them. And you're a father, and you know what your duties are as a parent. At the same time, after what I've seen the last 2 years, this morning I woke up and my wife I have twins, and I named my
congratulations.
son.
Yeah.
I named my son Safe after his cousin. Um, I woke up and Safe was next to me, and I remind myself about your question. The man to man part. I know men in Gaza and mothers in Gaza that have to find a marker or a Sharpie, and they write their kids' names on their arms, legs, and torsos every night in case they have to pick up their pieces and know which pieces are for which kids to bury them whole. So I also count my blessings every single moment to not be in the shoes of somebody going through a genocide because you know you hitting them from 1,000 feet above the air, and they don't even see it coming. That's not a man. At the same time, my tax dollars are funding this. So, even though I'm not directly complicit, am I doing enough to stop that? Do I love Muhammad more than that guy loves his son? Do do I am I a better father than you, who's also a father? So as a parent, as an uncle, you do what you can to make things right. But sometimes everything you're doing is not enough. But that makes you human. And the ones who are numb to it, or just turn a blind eye to it, and that's the real cowards. Because you not speaking up to it makes you complicit. You just acting like it's not going on. They're not even our same religion. So what?
Well, what's the saying? If there's something you can do, you do it. If not, you say something about it. What's the I the
So there's our prophet said what they call a hadith, which is when the prophet says something, peace be upon him, they would like take record of it and use it as an Islamic teaching. So he says, whoever of you sees an evil or an oppression, change it with your hand, like stop it. If you cannot do so, change it with your tongue, speak up against it. And if you cannot do so, then with your heart. But that is the weakest of your faith. So you see something wrong, you use your hands, you try to break it up. Uh, you fund, maybe you can hire a lawyer, use your hand, put it in your pocket, use your funds, try to help, this evil to go away, or help this oppression to go away. If you can't do that, if you can't forcefully change it or use your hands to do it, then speak up against it, which is what our First Amendment is, right? You know, and we saw people using their hands holding signs. And what happened? They get pepper spray. They get arrested. Then they spoke up against it in colleges and in other places. They got kicked out of college. They got charged, and then they got blacklisted from having jobs in the future. Well, guess what, America? That's been happening to us for 77 years. You're not allowed to say anything. You're not allowed to protest. You can't even go see your American child one time and see him behind bars for 9 months. You know, so you feel bad for it in your heart, and that's the weakest of your faith. And you try to make it make sense. Well, what do you mean feel bad for it in your heart? That means stay human. Put yourself in their shoes, and don't become numb to this. Don't fund it. If you can't stop it, fine, but don't fund it. Don't be a part of it. Feel bad for it in your heart and ask, God to change it.
I think they hide these types of things and they're embarrassed because they know it's wrong. And historically, this isn't the only group that's acted like this. The British were quite good at it. And back in the day when Gandhi was fighting the British, when they would get beaten down by the British soldiers and nobody saw it, nothing was able to happen. And Gandhi said, we need to be able to get beaten in front of the cameras so that the Western world can see how brutal the British are. And that is what started to break the stranglehold over there. So I think it's very important that, when people feel helpless because you're not local to the thing, you can't go there and do an action. The next best thing we can do is learn how to share the information, to share it in a compelling way so that people actually want to pick it up and internalize it, because these are some of the most important stories. And if we don't take the individuals like Saif and Mohammed and humanize them and show them and their story to the world, then people won't do anything. They won't do anything for 50,000 children being killed in Gaza because they're all faceless and nameless and nobody knows any stories about those people. But when you have American citizens in the West Bank, which is not Gaza, it's not under Hamas, it's under Palestinian Authority, and the settlers are not recognized as being allowed to live there. It's full on colonial effort in front of the United Nations, who has said since 1967, when they took that land, you're not allowed to do this. So there is something looming over. I mean, Whitney Webb calls it one nation under blackmail, but I think it's a whole lot more than one nation that's been blackmailed in these situations or pressured or bribed or any of these other things that are corruptions of our justice. And I think the truth matters. I think that when we have people out there that are able to conduct themselves in the open without any sort of like there's no constructive feedback going toward Marco Rubio, because that's how Marco Rubio got in his position in the first place. He was chosen because he's a very one-sided individual. He can look one way and not the other, and he can take the money and not cough, which is why Larry Ellison selected him before Trump even became president in 2016. So there are these things that these are obstacles on the terrain that should not be there. Our Secretary of State should be willing to go to any foreign nation and demand American citizens be released, returned, what have you. Otherwise, you're going to suffer under a B 2 bomber strike. That's traditionally how policy is handled in this country, except for our greatest democracy ally in the Middle East. And there might be a lot more to that story, which is what fills in the blanks when people are saying, why is Mohammed Ibrahim still in a military prison in Israel when he's an American citizen and he's a child? Why is
Oh,
that
they
going
have
on after 9 months?
they hired like like social media bots to put like social media comments like, oh, you do the crime, do the time. Well, he didn't do the crime. He's innocent. Number one. Not number two. You know, uh,
But you
600
also had
kids.
non-bots like Nick Fuentes, who, in response to one of the emails promoting Muhammad's situation, said, "No American is named Muhammad." That was his quote tweet on that, or his reply a couple weeks ago. And I remember
So
saying, "Duly noted, bro. Duly noted." Because
uh,
an American's an American, and we all came from different places. But this place had ideas and ideals higher and better than most of these other places that traditionally had all been monarchy, slave, kind of fiefdom type deals.
yeah,
America's an experiment. It continues on to this day because people of different colors, creeds, nations, and religions came to work together and experience freedom on a higher level. The type of freedom lets you start a fucking ice cream shop in Tampa. You can't do that in a lot of countries. They don't let you just start businesses and stuff like that. So living the American dream and then being transposed into the Israeli nightmare is something I think should have been better known and long ago in this story. But
yeah.
I know that you have I know that you have other important meetings this week, and I want to make sure that how can people promote, support? What is your recommended action for the audience, given that they probably don't know someone that can just pick up the phone and get them out? What are the places where people need to be on the radar? This topic needs to be on people's
R-
radar, and that's how things get done.
Real simple. I think any search on whatever platform that you go to on your phone or laptop, any simple search, Mohammed Ibrahim call to action. You'll see 5 or 6 different organizations have different call to actions. A lot of them are already set up where you can just click and put in your name. Their phone numbers, emails, local representatives, state representatives, the U.S. Embassy, the Israeli Embassy, DC. There's a lot of good people who are still human, from all different colors and different races and different religions, who are saying, you know what? The one thing we do agree on, that this he's a child, and if it was our kid, we want him back home. And that's the biggest disconnection, like the Fuentes comment you mentioned, right? That divide and conquer thing. You can miss me with that shit. That doesn't work no more. You know, it's 2025. You know, Thanksgiving is around the corner. When I was in school in Missouri, you told me that these people were starving. They got off of a boat and they were starving, and American Indians came and fed them and showed them how to eat, and they had this great feast that turned into Thanksgiving. And then how many years later you're telling me that those same people were genocide, and you said, you know what, we're going to give them 0.09% of their land, but we're going to let you put a casino on there, so now we're even, we're cool. you know uh, that miss, like that bullshit, that's that, and let everybody remember, that these are the people who are representing our American name, you know, and we're not like that. If you know a Palestinian and you enter his home or his town, you will see the most hospitality you ever seen in your life. You know, my American neighbors brought more gifts to my house for my twins, and I don't even know their names. They saw my wife pushing a stroller, and and they're bringing clothes and gifts. That's what America is. And I'm probably the darkest skinned person on the block, right? They're not looking at my color, they're not looking at my race, they're not, these are good people. So don't let them smear us, and don't let anybody talk about the Jewish faith. Good Jewish faith people have also been hijacked. Their religion has been taken away from them. That's why you have these people, Jewish Voices for Peace and Not in Our Name, and it's not has nothing to do with religion. If it had anything to do with God, the world would be a better place. So it's just about an American 15-year-old that should come home, that shouldn't have been there in the first place. And if we have to shame both governments into releasing them, even if they don't do it from the right perspective, then shame. We'll shame them as much as we need to.
Well, I think shame is a potent weapon, and I think that's a good strategy at this point because they should be ashamed. And if they believe, I don't see how people who believe in God could do such things. I don't see how that goes on. So I think there's a lot of people out there who are shamed and they've been faking, and
Yeah,
those people need to be called to order. And I think these situations and bringing light to the truth in these situations and making it clear and you know it's uncontradictable. And these consequences that are being generated from non action are only going to get worse for everybody involved. We don't need that. What we need is Mohammed Ibrahim back home with his family and all such cases being investigated, adjudicated, and no longer creating. Like I said, if they knew what they were doing was right, they would do it in the open. They wouldn't need military tribunal courts and all the secret system. Any type of secret system, whether it's Abu Ghraib or the Gulag Archipelago or any number in between, those things, those people knew what they were doing is wrong, which is why they hid it from everyone that they were doing it
yeah,
to.
I agree.
So continue to
Agree.
occupy the intellectual, moral, and ethical high ground. I think you gain the most support that way. I think you've done a wonderful job advocating for your family in a very, very tough situation. But I know other people who have been in similar situations and have found positive resolutions. So I'm going to hold out optimistic white pill hope because I know that people's hearts are part of their bodies and you can appeal to their human nature and get away from the Amtssprache. That's what Eichmann called the bureaucratic official language of the Nazis. That's how they did those atrocities. When they're talking about BMI, body mass index, is that Amtssprache so they don't look so bad, or is that them being kind to the families? I will give them the benefit of the doubt and assume they were being
Absolutely.
kind because it doesn't do
Absolutely.
me any good to assume the opposite. However, because there's a what is it? Hanlon's razor is never attribute malice when it could be incompetence. Grove's razor is don't attribute incompetence when people have had in writing policies and actions over time of doing these things. Don't assume it's incompetence when they had a business plan, they've been conducting it step by step over time, whether it's our government or another nation's government. Those things are true. So, yeah. Thank you, Z.
Richard, thank you. I want everybody just to remember a few names.
Yes, please.
Amanda Knox was in an Italian prison. you know she got coverage, she got help. She was taken out. I think there's 3 or 4 Americans in a Venezuelan prison, and the relationship right now in Venezuela and the US is really bad. I remember the North Korean, the US citizen that was in prison in North Korea. I think Dennis Rodman was put on a plane, and he sat with a North Korean, and somehow the guy, came home, as good faith. They sent somebody that was cool with the North Korean, and just I think this year or last year, is it Brittany? the WNBA basketball player. I think she was arrested in Russia. These are adults who were given charges and accused of stuff. You know, with Russia, Venezuela, North Korea, not the best diplomacy between the U.S. and these countries. Their best friend, a child, an American, right, with great relations, especially with our current administration, doesn't mean shit. It's make it make sense to me. I try to figure it out. Like the guy said, it's a layup for somebody to say, "Hey, ding, 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 look what I did." And our president is that guy. I did this. I thought, you know, please add this to your list. If you're watching this president, hey, take all the credit, honk your horn, get the kid home. You know, and give Lisa my best.
Well,
I'm glad she introduced us, and I appreciate it.
Well, I thank you for your courage and your bravery because it's inspiring. It's inspiring to other people. And these sort of things need to be done now, sooner than later, because if we wait for the political process to take its time, the situation is never good. They're not interested unless they experience pressure. And even though Trump could look like, a hero in this situation for bringing home an American teenager, there must be like he probably does want that, but what's this other thing over here that happens if he does that? Like, what is that's part of the American problem that we are still navigating during this presidency and other presidencies. It
I
seems to be a
agree.
lingering problem.
But
But yeah,
it should be a problem that they address.
without like leave the
Not
children out of it.
not not use my nephew as a pawn
Yeah,
or as a bargaining chip.
yeah.
And Richard, I'm on this couch. There's some space here. I hope the next time we do this, that my arms around my nephew, and I can show you, that he's home and he's safe.
When I hope soon after that I get to come eat ice cream with you guys because I got a family down there too. So, uh,
You get the family discount and more, man. Just come through.
well, getting Muhammad home is now a priority on more and more people's agendas across America, across the world. I've seen coverage from other countries. So keep doing what you're doing. If you need help getting booked any place or you're looking to get on some platform because you think they could actually add the necessary pressure, I mean, there's the Max Blumenthals and the Anna Kasparians and, these Kim Iverson. There's various people who do have very large audiences of people who are open to the message and they can help to explain it sometimes to the conservatives who only watch Fox and might not grant you the time or place because it conflicts with their agenda, right? So continued.
Well, as a family, we'll keep pushing. If there's anybody you guys like to plug us in with, we'd be happy to tell the story. And like I said, sometimes you see that one right person to hear it, and maybe that makes a difference. And
Absolutely.
that's what our intentions are. We're trying to start with our own, and hopefully some good comes from this and goes on, for years and years and years. And we don't have to talk about this shit anymore. It's just it's a sad, sad situation that unfortunately we're a part of. But our kids are not more important than other kids going through the same struggle. So we recognize that, and we hope God makes it easy on any parent going through this. And hopefully we could join the list of the people who made it out, not those Americans that were killed in the West Bank.
Zayed, thank you so much for taking time today. And I look forward to speaking to you soon under more positive circumstances.
Thank you, sir. Have a good night. Appreciate it. Bye bye.